Okay, so here comes chapter 23 called The Reverse of the Message. You'll remember that yesterday when we read, they discovered that the peony that they found was not the real peony, she was a fake, and they think that the person that they found was the daughter, or no, niece, somehow related to Victor Cormorant, the snake bird, and that she was responsible for the whole kidnapping. And they discovered the entrance to the below ground station inside Merrymead, and they were going down to check it out. All right, here we go. They crowded into the black brick space between the inner and outer walls, which was lit by 3 sconces with glass shades cut into elaborate arrangements of white petals that instantly reminded Marzana of the glass flower centerpiece in the radioactive tea shop. The stairs Amelia had mentioned were marble, and they led away down and down between the 2 walls, lit here and there by more of the dusty, beautiful sconces. It was hard to gauge the distance because she could see at least one turning in the stairs down there where they switched back on themselves, but logic said that if this passage led to a station, it had to be at or below the level of the school's cellars, where the kitchens, the science department, and the music classrooms were. The music classrooms were soundproofed. That probably helped. In any case, they were probably about to walk at least 2, maybe 3 stories down. Behind them, the sliding door that was the painting clicked again as Amelia drew it back into place. From this side, the echo turned the sound into more of a clunk that reverberated around them. Amelia paused, her head cocked to one side, listening. The voice singing on the other side of the wall was still just barely audible. Perfect. She trotted to the top of the staircase. Come on. The system maps down below. That's what I really want to show you. They all scooted aside to allow Amelia to lead the way. Marzana looked around for Nyala and reached out for her hand. And you said nothing ever happens around here, she whispered. Nyala squeezed her palm. But here we are. Here we are. Down and down and down. There was an iron railing on the library side wall, which probably saved them from avalanching to the bottom at least 3 times. Those stairs were steep. No sound came through the thick walls. Dust swirled in the purplish gray light. Marzana figured they had to have dropped below ground level by the time the light beneath them began to change. Then the wall on their left ended abruptly, replaced with an iron banister. Beyond it, the space widened out by 10 or 15 feet, and the members of the Thief Knot arrived on a landing that was separated from the wide space beyond and below it by a balcony with a carved marble railing. Welcome to Cottgrave Wall Station, Amelia said, grasping the marble baluster and looking down. Directly ahead of them, a massive chandelier hung from a domed mosaic ceiling, decorated with flowering vines against a background of paler jade. The chandelier dripped with cobwebby green glass that had been twisted into similar botanical drapes and curves, with glowing violet bulbs cupped by white glass petals that echoed the purple and white tiled blooms above. From either side of the balcony, twin staircases curved down, way, way down, maybe another 2 stories, to the station's platform below, where the marble floor was inlaid with stars and planets. Glass overhead and stars underfoot, Maddie said in a quiet voice that nonetheless echoed through the space. I like that. It reminds me of... She shook her head. Well, I like that. There didn't seem to be much more to the station than what they could see from above. Marzana stared hard at the tracks as she descended to the platform, trying to decide if they looked like they'd been used recently. The steel glittered in the light from the chandelier, but she couldn't tell if it had been polished by use or merely preserved in near-perfect condition. The platform was small, only about 15 feet deep, and maybe 3 times as long, and there was nothing approximating a ticket booth. But then the station had presumably been built back when Merrymead had still been the Cottgrave family home, a private station, requiring neither a ticket seller nor standing room for commuting crowds. There were 2 doors between the staircases. Ciro opened the one on the left and found a broom closet. The one on the right turned out to be a tiny bathroom. Between the doors, directly under the balcony, was a pair of iron and wood benches, old iron from the look of it. The metal had overgrown the wood slats of the seats and the backs, as if it were a shrub rather than part of a piece of furniture. And between those benches was a marble drinking fountain in the shape of a giant blossom erupting from the wall. Above that, "Wow," Marzana said, reaching with fingers outstretched to touch the rough mosaic surface of what appeared to be a complete map of the below-ground transit system. There, rendered in tiny fragments of cobalt and emerald and gold and indigo, laid over a field of pale apricot in the rough shape of the sovereign city of Nagspeak, was a branching structure like a coral or like some sort of fanciful plant out of Dr. Seuss. 4 train lines, each composed of a different color of glass, split and rejoined and parted ways again, radiating from a pewter-colored tangle near the middle. Each line was dotted along its length with small pewter circles, and beside each of these was a rectangle painted with the name of a station. Here and there, slender fingers of old iron had pierced through the map like roots protruding from the side of a riverbank. In some places, the iron fronds had punched bits of the mosaic right out, leaving glittering dust and bits of glass scattered on the floor below. In other places, the iron seemed merely to have worked its way in between the tiny tiles, and in those spots the smooth metal lay like a seam. "Wow is right." Nayala touched the map too. "Here we are, Cotgrave Wall." "Right." Amelia dropped her satchel on the right-hand bench, dug inside, and brought out a folded piece of crinkling paper, a roll of clear tape, and a pencil. "So here's what I want to show you." She stuck the pencil through one blonde braid. "Who's got the city map?" "Me." JJ produced the Gazetteer carefully, tore the insert from the back, and unfolded it. "Okay, hold it up next to the below-ground map." JJ and Meddy stood on the left-hand bench to hold the map of Nagspeak up against the wall. Meanwhile, Amelia unfolded the big, semi-transparent sheet she'd brought. "Tracing paper, swiped it from one of the art studios," she explained. Then she looked critically from JJ's map to the mosaic on the wall. "They're about the same scale, right?" "I think so," Marzana said. Nayala and Ciro nodded in their agreement. "Okay, so." Amelia tore off 2 pieces of tape and stuck them at the top corners of her paper. Then she climbed on the bench between Meddy and JJ and taped it over the map of the city. "You guys mind just making sure these don't fall?" "Sure," JJ said, and Meddy nodded impatiently. "Great, okay." Amelia turned, took the pencil from her braid, and began tracing the outline of Nagspeak. If we accept the real peony, fake peony theory, which I think is pretty much a certainty at this point, the big question is why, right? Not why did her parents play along with it? They want their kid back. And obviously, this is what they've been told they have to do before she'll be returned. Amelia's voice ricocheted off the wall. But if somebody went to, say, a carrier like Tasha Cormorant and said, "I need your help to accomplish X," and that carrier put the job together, one key part of which was Peony Heights kidnapping, what was X? If Tasha/Peony was meant to be found, the answer isn't money, Nayala observed. The kidnapping's a stepping stone to something else. Amelia nodded and paused to point her pencil over her shoulder at Nayala. "I think the key is to look at what, so far, the kidnappers have gotten. And the kidnappers did get something out of this, something big." Ciro spoke up. "Well, there's Tasha being foisted off on the hides, obviously. Presumably they're stuck with her for a while. Could that be important for some reason?" No, JJ said from the bench. "Winston Hyde quit his campaign." Amelia shook her head as she bent to trace the lower edge of the city. "That was my first guess, too. But I think there's more to it." She finished the outline and straightened up. "This is a weird crime, and I think the answer's weirder than just money or politics. Yes, her father quit the race, but something else happened, too." Meddy, who'd been silent during all of this, as she held her side of the map, spoke up at last. "They left. They took their changeling kid, and they split town." Amelia waved her pencil in the air. "Ding, ding, ding." "You think this whole thing was to get them to leave Nagspeak?" Marzana asked. "Why? And do you think Tasha went with them?" "Well, I didn't know about her when I came up with this theory," Amelia admitted. "But if she was hired as a carrier to provide a means to get the Hydes out of their house, then theoretically her part in this ends here. ends there. She doesn't have to be there for the end game, maybe. But let's come back to all that. Here's where I think things get weird. She pressed the tracing paper more firmly against the city map below it, so that the streets and landmarks showed through. Okay, here's the printer's quarter. Do we know where their house is? Marzana got her journal from her bag and flipped to her notes on the case. Watermill Street. I think Watermill sort of dead ends, and that's where they live. Amelia lifted the translucent paper and leaned close to the city map. Watermill is here, she muttered, following a line with her finger. And there's the dead end, just past Mergenthaler Street. She dropped the paper back into place, smoothed it down so that the edges of the city she traced lined up again, and drew a circle around the spot. Then she peeled the tape away and jumped off the bench with her paper. Thanks, Meddy, JJ. You guys can take a break. Ciro, can you give me a hand here? Hold one side of this. Together, Amelia and Ciro took the tracing paper to the below-ground map on the wall over the fountain between the two benches and lined it up so that the traced Nagspeak matched the tiled one. Ta-da! Amelia sang darkly. She pressed a hand to the paper, holding it flat against the wall so that the mosaic below showed through clearly. The circle that had been around Peony Hyde's house now perfectly ringed the pewter tangle that formed the hub of the whole below-ground network, a dot with a painted rectangular label that read Printer's Quarter, Mergenthaler Street. I don't think this was about getting Hyde to leave the campaign, and I don't think it was about getting the Hyde family to leave Nagspeak, Amelia said, lifting the tracing paper with a dramatic swoop. I think it was about getting them to leave their house. Peony's house is built over an old below-ground station? Ciro asked, switching the hand he was using to hold up his side of the tracing paper so that he could lean in for a better look. Not just any below-ground station, Amelia corrected. The below-ground station, the hub. Marzana stepped in for a closer look of her own. Amelia was right. All 4 lines ran through the station on Mergenthaler Street, or had before threads of iron had slithered in and broken up each of the colored routes on the map. She touched one tiny bit of green that had been shoved out of place and now hung by a scrap of mortar. It moved under her finger like a loose baby tooth and fell to the ground and broke in 2. You think somewhere under the foundations of the house there's probably still a way in? Amelia grinned, a triumphant flash that was there and then gone in the blink of an eye. That's exactly what I think. But in that case, why bother with a kidnapping? Meddy protested. Why not do a little light breaking and entering and be done with it? It must be completely inaccessible from above, Nyala said after a moment. Like it's going to take work for whoever wants to find a way through. Exactly, Amelia said. I think we'll find that every part of it that used to be above ground is totally gone. So gone that maybe not even the Hydes know it's there. Otherwise, yeah, the kidnappers could have just broken in. Okay, Meddy persisted, but in that case, she started to switch her grip on the tracing paper as Ciro had, and then made a noise of impatience. Why am I still holding this? Where's the tape? Amelia retrieved the roll. Meddy tore off 2 pieces, taped her corner up, then passed the tape to Ciro so he could do the same, while she used her remaining bit to secure the bottom edge. Then she pointed to the transit hub. If this particular station is connected to everything, why not just go in from another station? Nyala and Ciro spoke at the same time. The iron. The iron? Meddy repeated. Yeah. Ciro crouched and touched one of the reddish-gray trails of metal that had pushed glass aside to encircle Mergenthaler Street. Remember how I told you Granddad's notes talk about interference from the iron? Well, if it was interfering enough to make them eventually abandon the whole system, after most, if not all of it was already built, then surely it wouldn't quit interfering just because they stopped using the lines. Look at this. The station is totally cut off. JJ's eyes bugged out. You think somehow, for whatever reason, the iron poking through this map shows the actual interference pattern throughout the city? He stared at the mosaic. How would that even be possible? How could the iron here possibly know what iron elsewhere in the city is up to? I have absolutely no idea, and it sounds just as impossible to me as it does to you, Ciro admitted. It makes sense, though. Nyala traced the iron ring around Mergenthaler Street. If this station actually has been cut off from the rest, it would perfectly explain why someone who needed to get into it might think the path of least resistance was to go through the house above. And don't forget, Marzana added, the guy was running for mayor, and according to Emmett, likely to win. That house was never going to be without security, not for years. My point exactly, Amelia said, nodding. To get to the station, they needed to go through the house. To go through the house, they needed the hides gone for a significant period of time, and they needed their security detail gone too. She smiled. And now they have both, which means probably something is going on right here. She tapped the circle, and probably it's happening right now. Marzana stepped back and folded her arms. Okay, I'm convinced. So what do we do? Ciro asked. You want to try to call your folks right now? He took his phone from his pocket. You can. He glanced down at the screen. Never mind, I lied. You can't. No service underground, apparently. Wouldn't matter, Marzana said. She checked her watch. Nearly 12:30. They're down in the city giving a report to Emmett and his friends. I don't know exactly where. They might have left a number with Honora. Oh, or Emmett's number might have been in my folks' notes, now that I think of it. In which case, she stopped and scratched her head. Here's the question. Do we think Peony's likely to be with whoever's doing the breaking in, or would they have her somewhere else? There was a pause. Then Nyala snapped her fingers and pointed at Ciro. Let's go, you and me. We're figuring this out right now. She sat on the bench to the left of the fountain and the tile map, reaching into her bag and took out the photo and envelope that held her ransom note cuttings. Nyala, we talked about this, Ciro said, frustrated. There's no way there's anything hidden in the ransom note. Peony had no control over any part of that message. Nyala shook her head doggedly. I'm telling you, the book is the key. She yanked her copy out of her bag and dropped the envelope in the process, sending a flurry of the cut-out words cascading onto the bench's seat. It's too complicated, Ciro insisted, collecting the fragments. And the book isn't the key. The message is. She was desperate, Nyala interrupted. What does it matter if it's complicated? If it was the only possible communication she could send. Amelia, are you done with that paper? Amelia nodded and held out the roll of tape. Want this too? She wouldn't have had time, Ciro argued, intercepting the tape as Nyala detached the tracing paper from the wall, spread it on the floor, knelt beside it, and opened her copy of Saddlery to the first of the 24 or so flagged pages. They wouldn't have just stood there while she worked out a message to be left in a book she couldn't even count on anyone else identifying. It's here, Nyala said, her voice shaking a little. It has to be. Where's my pen? I had a pen. It's not. Ciro set down the tape and put his hands on the book, closing it gently. The only things she had to work with are these actual words. She couldn't have done any complicated steganography. Nyala, we need to try another tack. We need to stop wasting time. This isn't a game. Nyala slumped. I know it's not a game. Ciro held out the fragments he'd collected before. I'm sorry. And then just as Nyala reached out to take the bits, Ciro clamped his hand closed. These actual words, he repeated, uncurling his fingers and looking down at the bits of paper. Nyala looked from the scraps in the palm back up to his face. Ciro? He stared down at the words for a moment longer, then grabbed Nyala's hand and dumped them into it. Put them in order, one more time. Every letter accurate. Nyala's face lit up. Guys, shouldn't we? JJ began. Be quiet. Nyala shoved her glasses higher onto the bridge of her nose with one finger, took a deep breath, and began moving the fragments around on the tracing paper, turning them over, lining them up, looking at the reverse of this piece or that, and comparing it to the photo, then putting it in place. JJ was right. They had to move on, figure out what to do next. Marzana spoke up. Nye. But Nyala ignored her, just focused her energy on getting each of the zeros in 1 million in exactly the right spot. Ciro kept silent too. He watched Nyala's moving fingers with an almost breathless air. Amelia and Meddy stood like spectators waiting. I think that's right, Nyala said at last, looking at her handiwork. She checked it once more against the note, then sat back satisfied. Tape. She held her hand out to Ciro, who knelt at her side, and began tearing off bits and passing them to her to affix the words in place. When she had finished, Nyala sat back. All yours. Now she was breathless with expectation. Ciro tore off 2 more pieces of tape and stuck them at the top corners. Then he stood, lifted the tracing paper with index fingers and thumbs, and climbed up to tape it on the wall above the right-hand bench. He stepped back and looked at Nyala. She put a hand over her mouth. Ciro nodded, scratched his head. You were right. What are we looking at? Marzana asked impatiently. I'll show you. He He felt his pockets, then looked around. Who's got a flashlight? Marzana took hers from her kit and handed it to him. Ciro, in turn, offered it to Nyala. You should do this. Thanks. Nyala pulled the bottom of the paper out just far enough so that she could stick up the flashlight behind it. Then she clicked the light on. Ciro had taped the tracing paper up backwards, with the text of the ransom note facing the wall. One by one, they realized what they were actually looking at. Oh my gosh, Marzana said. JJ swore. Amelia swore. Are you kidding? Mehdi exploded. You were right, Ciro said again. I still can't quite believe it. Backlit by the flashlight, a new text showed through the translucent paper. It was sloppy, but the tops, bottoms, and sides of some words snipped off, and there were gaps in between words and parts where there was no text, merely bits of illustrations. But it was instantly legible, and there was no mistaking it. This wasn't a case of Nyala seeing meaning because she was desperate to find it. It was a message, and it was visibly, undeniably there. In the dark, with the teacups, animal noise is loud. Barks, howls, screams, smell is water like pools. Where the heck did that come from? JJ demanded. It's the reverse of the message, Ciro said, as Nyala clicked off the flashlight. That's what's on the back of the ransom note words. There was only one thing she could control, where she cut the words from. I know I argued for this, Nyala said, grabbing her backpack and taking out a straight piece of loose leaf paper, but somehow I'm still a bit shocked. She glanced at Ciro as she rooted around in the depths of her bag. You were right. She couldn't count on anyone having the book. The message had to be easier to find than that, and still, no one found it. No one but you, Ciro said, shaking his head. I'm sorry I doubted you. No, you were right too. I was hunting in the wrong place. Thanks for finding the right way to look at it. Now, what in the heck does this mean? She grunted in frustration. Seriously, who has a pen? Mine's fled the building or something. Oh, thank you. She accepted one from Amelia, plunked down on the floor again, and started copying the new message down. There, she's someplace that has teacups, and all these are the animal noises she can hear, and it smells like pool water. What the heck kind of place is that? Amelia blinked, frowned slightly, then her forehead furrowed in thought. Sounds like a public pool, but you couldn't hide a kid anywhere near a public pool at the beginning of summer. Too busy. She said like pools, Marzana pointed out, which implies not a pool, but something like it, something she can't see but can smell. And the loud animal noises? What about a zoo? JJ suggested. Maybe the animal sounds would help drown out a kid yelling for help? Ciro shook his head. I feel like at a zoo, the prevailing smell wouldn't be the pool chemicals. But where else would you get all those different noises in one place? Maybe she's hearing coyotes or foxes or something, Marzana said. Some animal that makes a whole range of sounds. Do they have any of those downhill? I think the teacups in the dark are the key, Nyala said. I feel like Peony must have thought the right person would read that and know exactly what she means. It must be a downhill thing. Something someone who lives in the city proper would immediately know. Hey, Marzana. Mehdi had wandered away from the group and was standing at the edge of the platform. Guys, she leaned over the tracks and stared down into the tunnel. Do you hear something, or is it just me? Marzana stepped away from the others and went to stand beside Mehdi. Do you hear it? The ghost girl asked. It's still way out there, but I think I hear a rumble. Marzana leaned out too. There was nothing to see. The tunnel was a pool of ink, fading from tones of gray to velvety black nothingness. But was there a sound? Ciro came to stand next to Marzana. I think I hear it, he said hesitantly. Not me, JJ said after a moment from Ciro's side. Nyala and Amelia said nothing, just came to the edge to stand beside JJ and listen. Nyala looked past the boys and caught Marzana's eye. What about you? She signaled. Marzana hesitated. Then, abruptly, there it was. She felt it before she heard it, just barely perceptible vibration underfoot. She crouched and put a hand on the tiled floor, then looked up at the chandelier with its blue bulbs and white petals. The sound, as they, too, began quivering, was like the tinkling of glass bells. Yeah, Marzana said, standing. I hear it, too. Okay, JJ said slowly. Do we freak out? Do we not freak out? Run and hide, or some equivalent form of get the heck out of here? He glanced around. Thoughts? I think there's only one thing this can be, Medi said, looking up as the tinkling from above began to grow into a proper rattling of glass. In which case, I think we stay right here. A couple of the violet light bulbs flickered. I think we just got a break. But how? Amelia asked wide-eyed. Why? Just our being here couldn't have done it. I was here for hours before. Marzana thought back to her conversation with Milo. There's a call system, she remembered, in the station by our house. He had said it looks like a doorbell. She turned to Amelia. Maybe the button or switch or whatever you hit before you managed to turn on the lights? Amelia opened her mouth in a wide, soundless, oh, yeah, maybe. Now the sound was unmissable, a deep rumble of wheels on tracks, accompanied by a higher note that was almost like a clatter. If a clatter could somehow sound sturdy, substantial, and still remain a clatter. And there was light, a toasty, incandescent glow that was completely different from the dusty violet of the station, had begun to warm the red brick walls of the tunnel in sunset tones. Soon, two gleaming slicks of brilliance poured out along the two steel tracks, turning them from dull silver to summery gold. The glow brightened and extended its reach as the clatter and rumble approached. The members of the thief knot stepped back, hands reaching for hands or slipping through elbows to link arms until each one had a hold of someone else. The noise rose and rose as the glaring blaze spilled into the station and flung long shadows out onto the platform behind them. And then, with the squeal of brakes and the thudding of what must have been tons of machinery grinding to a halt, a huge bullet of wood, glass, and painted steel shot, already slowing, into Cotgrave Wall Station. Nearly blinded by the light from the massive single headlight at the train's nose, Marzana barely had time to register a dark human-shaped form in one of the front windows before the first car tore past, flinging green sparks up from below. With the screech of metal on metal, the train lurched to a stop. It sat there for a heartbeat or three as it settled, 4 cars long and tall enough to fill the tunnel it had emerged from, its greenish, many-painted windows lit from within by sconces topped by glowing frosted glass balls. The sides of each car were paneled in deep brown, highly varnished wood, and the metal above and below was painted the red of new brick with stripes the color of goldenrod. Then there was a hiss of hydraulics, and the train leaned down until the lower edge of its doors more or less lined up with the station floor. Marzana and her crew inched closer to one another. We're still not getting the heck out of here? JJ asked in a strained voice as a set of hinged doors near the front of the train folded open. Just making sure we're solid on not getting the heck out of here? Before anyone could answer, a very tall man in green coveralls stepped out, his eyes hidden by a pair of leather-bound goggles. He shoved them up into his short blonde hair and gave the kids a long, dubious look. Dubious, love it. What the blazes have we got here? He asked in an accent that marked him as very different, very definitely not from Nagspeak. Medi detached herself from the rest of the knot. Leave this to me? She stepped forward. The blonde man pointed a long finger at her. I know you. Yeah, you do. We met at Green Glass House 2 years ago, Medi smiled. Hi, Brandon. Milo's friend, right? He frowned, obviously trying to remember the details of when they'd met. Your name's Addie. Maddie. Then his eyes bugged out as he remembered. Addie! But aren't you... Yeah, Medi said quickly, saving the strange man from having to pretend he hadn't been about to say dead. And everybody calls me Medi. Medi, right. I don't believe it, he said, scratching his head under the goggles. What on earth are you doing all the way up here? Oh, you know, shenanigans. Another good word. Medi turned back to the knot. These are my friends. Marzana, everybody. This is Brandon Levi. He's the conductor of the Below Ground. The next chapter is called The Sacrifice Chapter.